What's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today I want to make a video talking about my top 10 best jiu-jitsu artists in the UFC. These are the guys who get the submissions all the time. These are some of the best grapplers inside the organization. But I mainly want to focus on jiu-jitsu because there are so many high-level jiu-jitsu specialists in the UFC. And really, it is something that is going away. There's not as many as there used to be, but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is one of the most effective ways to win fights inside the organization. And truly, these are some of the best at it in the respective weight classes. I wouldn't want to go up against any of these individuals. I know striking is something that comes more common to human beings, but Jiu-Jitsu is something that a 5'6" man could take down a 6'6" man and truly show him that the skills of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu doesn't matter upon your weight, rather than just your overall skill and knowledge in that field. So I kind of want to touch on my top 10 fighters in the UFC currently who have the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skills. But before we jump into the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help the channel grow. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications just so you guys are always notified about UFC content releasing every single day, and just so you guys aren't missing content that releases anytime. But without further ado, let's jump right into the video talking about the top 10 best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists currently inside the UFC organization. At number 10, I have Brendan Allen, and being inside the middleweight division, having that just absolute great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu ability is something that is absolutely insane. If I look at from his fight at February 5th, 2022, to his win over Paul Craig, November 18th, 2023, that is 6 fights right there, and 5 of those were wins by rear naked choke, submission wins. And that is something that is incredibly, absolutely insane to see, considering that Brendan Allen is such a good jiu-jitsu fighter that he is able to every single time avoid the ground game, get the fight to the ground, and go in there and absolutely submit these individuals. Now, I know in his last 2 fights, he wasn't able to submit Chris Curtis and get the win in that one, but he also lost to Nasruddin Imava, not being able to get the submission win into that one. But really, Brendan Allen has such a great jiu-jitsu game to where anytime he gets the fight on the ground, he is able to turn different positions into submission threats and being able to do different things like calf slicers, leg locks, rear naked chokes, arm bars, different types of stuff like that. And at his size in a division, as you get higher up, the skills kind of fall down, rather the power rises. But being so skillful inside that middleweight division is something massive for Brendan Allen, and truly that's why he lands here at number 10 inside my top 10 BJJ fighters inside the UFC organization. At number 9, I have Islam Makhachev. Now, Islam Makhachev isn't a BJJ fighter. I want to make that very clear. But his submission game and the way he can work off your back is incredibly amazing. If you look in that Dustin Poirier fight, he was switching from kind of a rear naked choke to try to get the armbar and move into the Kimura ever so slightly. And it was such a beautiful thing to watch. Also, Islam Makhachev went in there and submitted Charles Oliveira at UFC 280. He went in there and submitted Dan Hooker with a nasty Kimura at UFC 268. Islam Makhachev is one of the greatest jiu-jitsu fighters in the organization right now, even though he is primarily known for his sambo and wrestling ability. Jiu-jitsu is one of those things that really allows you to finish fights, and not saying that Islam isn't he's not the greatest jiu-jitsu artist inside the organization, but he's definitely top 10 with how he understands how to throw submissions in, how to use them to manipulate certain positions, and ultimately grants him these easy wins inside the top part of the UFC lightweight division. Ultimately, Islam's just absolutely uncanny ability to fight for submissions and get them inside the top lightweight part of the division against fighters who are great jiu-jitsu fighters like Dustin Poirier, like Charles Oliveira, like Dan Hooker. And it's just one of those things that Islam Makhachev kind of goes underrated, considering that he's primarily known as a wrestler. But 100% Islam at number 9 for my top 10 jiu-jitsu fighters inside the UFC organization. At number 8, I have Paddy Pimblett, and I know Paddy gets a lot of bad raps inside the UFC. He might not be the greatest striker. He might not have the best cardio. But what Paddy is amazing at is he is a top caliber UFC jiu-jitsu specialist. And look at that Bobby Green fight. Bobby Green kind of got kicked off balance by someone like Paddy Pimblett, and Bobby Green automatically, I think, shot for a takedown. And as soon as he got to the ground, he understood the deep, just absolute trouble that he was in, considering that Paddy Pimblett had him by a head and arm triangle, which was absolutely insane, that he transitioned into an arm bar, which was even crazier, and Bobby Green was asleep before Paddy Pimblett could even get the arm bar. But he had 2 different submissions on Bobby Green at once. Paddy Pimblett's probably most notable win, besides Bobby Green, that being by Jordan Levitt, where he did get the rear naked choke in that fight, considering that Levitt what is a good fighter, but Paddy Pimblett went in there to show that there are levels to this game inside the UFC organization. Paddy Pimblett might not be the best overall fighter, but when you just talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Paddy Pimblett is on another level and 100% deserves to be in the top 10 inside the UFC organization. At number 8, I have Mr. Renato Needs Money Moicano. He is such a great jiu-jitsu fighter. If you look at that Jalen Turner fight, the way he was able to get back mount and ultimately pound Jalen Turner for a victory, that was incredibly impressive. But the fight I really want to highlight is this last one that he had at UFC Paris in the main event against Benoit Saint-Denis. He knew Benoit was going to come out there, throw in those quick kicks. Benoit's a very kick-heavy fighter, and Renato Moicano took him down and just beat the life out of him. That was one of the most gruesome rounds I have seen inside the organization, and I have not seen too many 10-7 rounds, and that is definitely one that could be qualified to be a 10-7 round. Benoit's eye was completely closed, and the fight ultimately had to stop after the second round because Benoit's face was that bad. Renato Moicano is incredibly intelligent and incredibly strong, and he has some of the best jiu-jitsu ability inside the organization right now. If you're a lightweight inside the division, I would not want to go up against Renato Moicano, considering how good of a jiu-jitsu specialist he truly is inside the UFC. I know Moicano might not be the fastest guy, he might not be the strongest guy, but his jiu-jitsu and his body control is absolutely amazing. He is so fluid while on the ground, and truly he can move from one position to another while ultimately cranking up a submission anytime he really wants. Renato Moicano at number 7, something that I truly love, and 100% he deserves to be in this place on my UFC top BJJ artists currently. At number 6, I have Mr. Diego Lopes, and Diego Lopes is an absolutely incredible jiu-jitsu specialist. I know he's been getting fights recently, like the Brian Ortega fight. He had a knockdown on Ortega, and his striking was at the forefront. Sadiq Youssef, he got a knockdown in. Pat Sabatini, he got a knockdown in. And Dan Ige, he was kind of piecing him up on the feet. But you got to remember that he is one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists inside the UFC. In his opening fight, he fought Movsar Evloev and got an incredible leg lock that looked incredibly painful for Movsar, and that was probably easily the deepest position that Movsar has ever been in inside the UFC organization. In his next fight, I forgot who the opponent was, but he kind of jumped into a head and arm triangle, which automatically turned into an armbar, breaking the guy's arm in half. That was incredibly insane. I think it was actually Gavin Tucker, but truly, Diego Lopes is one of the best submission artists inside the UFC, and he's able to manipulate your body weight to be able to get different positions inside the organization, to be able to get different submissions. Diego Lopes might be a great striker. He is one of the best featherweight prospects right now. He's just so good. He could 100% go in there and compete with the Max Holloways, compete with the Ilya Toporias, compete with the Alexander Volkanovskis. He's just that good. And the one thing that really allows him to elevate the game over those other individuals is just how good his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist he is. He has so many different submissions in his bag. He's able to go to different positions and ultimately end fights very early on, considering if the other fighter makes one single mistake. Diego Lopes, 100% at number 6 on my top 10 BJJ artists inside the UFC organization as of right now. Now, at number 5, this fighter I would have a lot higher if this was a little bit long ago, but I have Gilbert Burns. And Gilbert Burns, even though he's 38 years old, is one of the best BJJ artists inside the UFC. I know he just fought Sean Brady, and Sean Brady kind of had him in some different positions, but Gilbert Burns is absolutely incredible way of being able to get up from the ground, being able to do different things, and being able to get so many different submissions inside the organization. He is 100% one of the best ground game artists inside the organization. You look at his fight with Khamzat Chimaev, and this was kind of when he was a little bit younger, but really, Khamzat wasn't able to just absolutely overpower him like he did on the ground, like to someone like Kamaru Usman, like Kevin Holland, like Li Jingliang. Gilbert Burns held his own in that category, and that is just because of how intelligent Gilbert Burns is in the submission department, in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu department. Truly, Gilbert Burns is one of those fighters inside the organization that is incredibly amazing at the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he will go down as one of the best Jiu-Jitsu artists currently that the UFC has ever seen, up there with Damian Maia, up there with those Brazilian fighters, because truly, Gilbert Burns has some of the greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu the organization has ever seen, and the only reason he ranks at only number 5 is because he's a little bit older in his career. He just fought Sean Brady, who has amazing jiu-jitsu as well. And, he has some great moments in his career, like that 3-minute submission over Neil Magny at UFC 283. That was incredible. A lot of different exchanges with Jorge Masvidal that he was kind of doing. But Gilbert Burns, 100%, is an amazing jiu-jitsu fighter, and he 100% deserves to be here at number 5 on my list. At number 4 on my top 10 best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists, I have Brian T. City Ortega. And Brian Ortega's biggest drawback in his game was his lack of wrestling ability, because Brian is such a good Jiu-Jitsu artist that anytime he got on the ground, it was threatening submissions. If you remember back to UFC 266 in that main event, I believe that was the card with Alexander Volkanovski, he dropped Volkanovski right down to the ground, and he jumped right on a mounted guillotine. One of the deepest submissions I have ever seen inside the organization. And how Volkanovski got out of that, I think it's just a testament to how just, one, strong he is, and two, how little of a neck Volkanovski is. But any other fighter would have been 100% submitted by Brian Ortega in that situation. Brian Ortega coming in against Yair Rodriguez the second time, because the first fight he blew out his shoulder, he really started implementing some wrestling games, and look at that. As soon as he was able to implement the wrestling in the third round, Yair pretty much fell into a Darce choke, I believe it was, in that fight pretty easily. Brian Ortega, 100% is one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists in the UFC, skill for skill. He's got so many different submissions that he's got, so many good guillotines, rear naked chokes, Darce chokes, mounted guillotines, so many different things, and you 100% will have a bad time if you fight Brian Ortega because of how just truly skilled he is inside the organization when it comes to the submission department. At number 3, I have Aljamain the Funk Master Sterling. And I know not a lot of people are a big fan of Aljo, but Aljo 100% is one of the biggest threats at 145 currently, and probably the biggest threat ever at 135 with his submission game. He went in there and beat Corey Sandhagen, one of the highest regarded fighters, even to this day at 135 by rear naked choke, in like under 1 minute. He went in there and he backpacked Peter Yan for the entire fight. Though Olympic gold medalist Henry Cejudo got absolutely taken down and rocked by Aljo. I know he wasn't able to take down Sean O'Malley, but I think that's because Sean O'Malley was just praying that Aljo would run in for the shot, and he ultimately did. Aljamain Sterling now power bombed Calvin Kattar at 145, and is such a great jiu-jitsu artist. He kind of absolutely just neutralized Calvin Kattar at that UFC 300 match. But truly, right now, Aljamain Sterling is probably the dark horse in the 145-pound division, considering that he's not cutting as much weight and of how much of a Brazilian jiu-jitsu skill he is. Aljo's also got a good wrestling game, so he's able to implement different positions in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and his submission game inside the UFC organization is some of the best we have ever seen, considering that he is such an amazing, complete fighter. Aljo, in my opinion, is top 3 best jiu-jitsu artists inside the UFC right now, and him being the human backpack, yes, that is one of his nicknames, Aljo 100% deserves this slot inside the UFC top 3 out of the top 10 best Brazilian jiu-jitsu artists currently. At number 2, I have Sean Brady. Sean Brady is one of my favorite fighters inside the organization, just because you can see his IQ in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu department game. If you look at that fight with Gilbert Burns that he just had back in September, my fault, he was going in there and was taking down Gilbert Burns, was advancing positions over Gilbert Burns, and him being one of the greatest Jiu-Jitsu artists the organization has ever seen. Truly, you can already tell of how good Sean Brady is. In his last fight prior at UFC Austin against Kelvin Gastelum, he literally put a pitch to shutout against Gastelum. Gastelum had no answer for anything he did because Sean Brady was beating Kelvin Gastelum to different positions, not allowing him to get up or even start the process of giving up. And that was one of the most impressive performances I've ever seen. And that is probably a fight that made me the biggest Sean Brady fan I've ever seen. Because truly, seeing him being able to beat Gastelum to different spots and just completely outsmart him on the ground was something incredible to see. And not only see that he got one of the just nastiest Kimuras I have ever seen, right up there with Islam's and Dan Hooker's. Sean Brady is such an intelligent fighter inside the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu department, and really, Sean Brady is going to be an absolute just menace in the welterweight division, being able to take down these different individuals. If you look at Sean Brady versus Ian Gary would get turned into a pretzel. There's really not that many fighters inside the organization that I could really see beating Sean Brady, unless if you have a great grappling defense. And even then, his striking has got so much better over his kind of time off inside the organization after that loss to Bilal Muhammad, that I truly do think that that is going to implement or allow him to transition into grappling exchanges better. It's going to allow him to get different submissions easier and show everyone why Sean Brady is one of the best fighters inside the organization. I know he might not be one of the most well-known fighters, but truly, Sean Brady's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is absolutely world-class, and in my opinion, is the second best inside the UFC organization. And at number 1, you gotta go Charles Do Bronx Oliveira. Charles Do Bronx Oliveira has the most submissions inside the UFC. You look at that fight with Justin Gaethje, knocked him down to the ground, automatically changed to the rear naked choke. An incredible submission there. You look at his fight with Dustin Poirier, going into that third round, standing rear naked choke inside the organization. He is such an amazing fighter. Even with that fight at UFC 300 with Arman Tsarukyan, he had Arman in an incredibly deep guillotine in that fight. And in that third round, he almost was able to pull off a late comeback victory with that Darce choke. Charles Oliveira has literally every single submission you could ever want in the book. And I could keep going on. That fight with Tony Ferguson, I think it was at the end of the first round. That crazy armbar. If you've never seen Charles Oliveira versus Tony Ferguson and the just absolutely crazy armbar Charles put on Tony, please go watch that. And it's kind of a little bit graphic, but Charles Oliveira is able to contort his body, be able to manipulate different positions, and truly show the organization why having the most submissions can be such an effective way to win different fights. Charles Oliveira, in my opinion, is easily the best pure jiu-jitsu artist currently. He's able to get your back. He's able to go into mount. He was welcoming opponents down to the ground, and they were so scared of his guard game that truly Charles Oliveira was being able to make fighters stand him back up, like Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier. They were so scared to go down there into Charles Oliveira's guard because they know the consequences in getting stuck in a different submission. Charles Oliveira having that kind of aura around him, being known as one of the best jiu-jitsu artists inside the organization, truly makes a very scary fight, considering that he is able to, one mistake, he's able to transition into different submissions. Like Arman made maybe 1 or 2 mistakes in that fight, and Charles was able to cinch up some of the tightest chokes I have ever seen in that UFC 300 bout. But ultimately, Charles Oliveira, in my opinion, is the best jiu-jitsu artist in the UFC right now, considering that he has the most submissions in UFC history and has just continued to show how he's able to manipulate different positions and just truly just put his opponents in an incredible world of distress. Charles Oliveira is 100% the best submission artist inside the UFC organization. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know what you think about this top 10 BJJ artists currently inside the UFC organization. I'm kind of going to go 10-1, starting with Brendan Allen at 10, Islam Makhachev at 9, Paddy Pimblett at 8, Moicano at 7, Diego Lopes at 6, Gilbert Burns at 5, Brian Ortega at 4, Aljamain Sterling at 3, Sean Brady at 2, and Charles Do Bronx Oliveira at 1. All these fighters are incredibly amazing in the jiu-jitsu department, and if you get into some sticky situations in the submission game, you can 100% bet that these fighters are going to be able to finish the fight. Someone like Charles Do Bronx Oliveira with his different submissions, like his rear naked chokes and his guillotines, are some of the craziest things I've ever seen inside the organization. And truly, those are things that really allow him to separate fighters and ultimately be dangerous at all times, no matter the situation. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy the UFC content. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications just so you guys are always notified about the future UFC content as it releases every single day. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.